Are my heart, my soul, my guiding light.
I sang because I missed my mother. It was just a rainy night, a small, nearly empty Italian cafe, and a promise broken under my breath. That song wasn't supposed to leave my chest. My mother had made me swear I would never sing it for strangers. But I sang it, and at the back table, Matteo De Luca froze as if I had pointed a gun at his heart. I tried to run, too late, because that man wasn't just a customer. He was a Mafia boss. And I found out too late that my mother's song was the secret that could destroy his empire. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The Song I Wasn't Supposed to Sing. A fine rain was falling over Manhattan with that stubbornness of someone in no hurry to leave. It was a rain without thunder, without wind, without drama, the worst kind, the kind that soaks you slowly and doesn't give the body a decent warning to protect itself. I closed out the register at Mr. Greco's laundromat, counting the coins for the third time, because the first count had been short and the second had been over, and distrusting a round number was an old habit of mine. The crumpled bills smelled of laundry powder and the old steam that drifted out of the machines in the back of the shop, a smell that had clung to my skin after so many shifts I didn't even notice it anymore, except when a stranger wrinkled their nose near me on the subway. "Girl, you count money like you're praying," Mr. Greco grumbled from the other side of the counter, folding a white shirt with the dry patience of someone who had been doing it for 30 years. "If you prayed less and slept more, you'd make fewer mistakes. I sleep enough. You sleep on the leftovers." He stretched out his thick hand, fingers stained yellow with tobacco, took the key to the register, and looked me up and down. "When's rent due again?" "Yesterday." "Then you don't even sleep on the leftovers. Go on. Get out of here before it starts thundering and I have to put up with you for another hour." I grabbed my coat off the hook, kissed the air near his cheek, and walked out. The bell on the door jingled behind me with that crumpled tin sound I had already memorized. 3 blocks to the building. The rain slipped down my collar, ran along my spine, and I thought about small things to avoid thinking about rent, about the bag of bread that was running out, about the sock with a hole in it that I had forgotten to mend, about the bathroom bulb that had started flickering the night before, which I pretended not to have noticed because replacing a bulb also cost money. Anything that wasn't the fact that, at 24, I still lived in a borrowed room and still didn't have an address that lasted more than 6 months. My mother used to say, that was what freedom looked like. She died before I could answer back. I went up the building stairs 2 at a time to escape the smell of mildew in the hallway. I opened the door to my room, threw the soaked coat over the back of the chair, and the first thing I did, before taking off my shoes, was kneel in front of the old suitcase under the bed. It was worn leather, with buckles that had lost their shine decades ago. Inside, only 3 things: a blue dress I had never worn, Elena Bellucci's notebook of lyrics, and the gold locket. I picked up the locket first. It was cold against my palm, the metal holding that temperature of something that doesn't belong to the world we live in, and I pressed it to my forehead before hanging it around my neck, the way I had been doing since I was 11. Then the notebook. The pages had that yellowing of papers that had survived a lot. I leafed through slowly, without needing to look, because I already knew where every song was by the feel of the fold, by the weight of each piece of paper. There was one marked in red, halfway through the notebook, and I always skipped over it with my thumb without opening it. That night, I stopped on the page before the marked one. I pressed my nose to the paper. It smelled like her. I swore it smelled like her, like the cheap cologne she used to dab on her wrist, and the vanilla soap that lingered in the bathroom for months after the funeral, as if a dead woman could insist on staying by way of scent. The phone rang. "Sienna, sweetheart." Bruno's voice came down the line the way it came into people's lives, without asking permission. "Tell me something. Do you need money?" "Bruno, say yes, because I need a singer tonight. The pianist canceled. The cafe is empty, but I'll pay you up front if you come." I closed the notebook in my palm. "What time?" "In an hour. Come on, girl. Come before the rain gets worse." I hung up without promising anything and stayed sitting on the floor staring at the notebook. Rent was due. Mr. Greco had already grumbled 3 times that week, and his grumbling had a rhythm. On the 4th time came the line about the new girl who could really use a job. I knew the rhythm. I got up. I changed my wet blouse for one that was wet in a different way. I combed my hair with my fingers, because the comb had broken 2 days earlier, and I still hadn't bought another. I put the notebook in my bag. Café Aurora sat on the corner of a street nobody noticed anymore. It had a narrow front, a window fogged on the inside by the steam of the espresso machine, and a sign with the paint peeling off the letter A. Bruno said he was going to repaint it. He had been saying that since I'd known him. When I walked in, he dropped the cloth on the counter and opened his arms before he opened his mouth. The smell of ground beans, melted butter, and old bread warming in the low oven wrapped me in a warm layer the rain outside hadn't allowed until then. I told you it was going to rain. You say it's going to rain every day, Bruno. And I'm right. He pushed a hot latte into my hand before I could protest, and looked me over from head to toe with the face of a man who had already decided to worry. You eating right? Yeah. Liar. He pointed to the stage, 3 low wooden steps against an exposed brick wall. Pick your set list. There's like 5 lost souls in here tonight, so you can do whatever you want. I looked across the room. The rain had emptied the cafe, just like he'd said. At a table by the window, an old couple shared a plate of cookies, and the wife pushed the best piece toward her husband without looking, in an old gesture of someone who loves out of reflex. At a table in the middle, a woman read a book with her glasses on the tip of her nose. And at the back, at the corner table, 3 men in dark suits were talking quietly with a 4th man whose back was to me. The 3 in front had that look of people who size up a room before opening the menu. Eye on the shoulder, shoulder on the watch, watch on the door. Who are they? I asked Bruno quietly. He shrugged a little too fast, and the cloth on his shoulder swayed in a way that answered before his mouth did. Customer. Closes some deals here now and then. Doesn't concern you. I'm not concerned. I'm just asking. Then don't ask. He nudged me toward the stage with his palm against my back. Go sing. The sooner you start, the sooner you get paid. I climbed the 3 steps onto the stage with the notebook pressed tight against my chest. The microphone was old, one of those round ones with the foam half worn away, and there was a wire wrapped around the base with electrical tape in so many colors, it looked like a little girl's bracelet. The light above my head was yellow and weak, the kind that makes a face look prettier out of sheer laziness to show the truth. I opened the notebook on the wooden ledge in front of the mic. I started slowly. Some song of Elena's, one of the ones I had sung 1,000 times in the shower, on the subway, in Bruno's kitchen while he fried eggs. The couple by the window kept talking without looking at me. The woman with the book turned a page. The men at the back didn't even move. I sang a second song, a third. Bruno, behind the counter, tapped the cloth against his shoulder to the rhythm, and for a second, the whole room felt warmer than it should, with the steam from the machine rising in thin columns to the low ceiling. And I thought maybe that was all this was. Maybe I'd just get through the night without thinking about rent. And then my thumb stopped on the page marked in red. I can't explain what happened. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the smell of the paper I'd pressed to my nose an hour earlier. Maybe it was the locket weighing against the base of my throat as if Elena were leaning into me on purpose. The rule had existed for so long that I had never questioned why. Never sing that one in public, Sienna. Promise me. I was 11 when I promised. I was 11 and she was already too thin, with thin wrists and the hoarse voice of someone who sang curled up under the comforter so the neighbors downstairs wouldn't wake up. I lifted my eyes from the notebook and looked at the fogged window. I missed her the way you miss air. I broke the promise on impulse. The first note came out thin, almost a whisper, and I closed my eyes so I wouldn't give up halfway through. The second came out steadier. By the third, I couldn't turn back, because the melody had that kind of hook that catches in the throat of the person singing it before it catches in the ear of the person listening. It was a lullaby. It was the song she used to sing when I couldn't sleep, before she got so thin that stopping singing became another way to save her breath. The lyrics were in Italian, simple, about a little girl waiting for sleep on a balcony while her mother counted the stars wrong on purpose to make her laugh. I sang through the second verse, and that was the moment the espresso machine stopped hissing. The old ceiling fan, which creaked with every turn, went silent between one revolution and the next, without anyone noticing the exact point at which it stopped. No one set down a cup. No one breathed loudly. I opened my eyes. The couple by the window was still eating cookies. The woman with the book had lifted her head and was watching me with gentle curiosity. Bruno had stopped tapping the cloth against his shoulder and was holding it suspended in the air, as if he were about to resume the gesture any second, and had forgotten how. And at the back table, the man who had been sitting with his back to me had slowly turned his head. I couldn't see his face clearly, because the yellow stage light didn't reach that far, and the back table was lit by a single candle that flickered in a way that gave his profile the look of something carved from poorly finished stone. But I saw enough to register 3 things. In the order they entered my head, the dark suit was expensive in a way that didn't match this cafe. The glass in his hand had stopped halfway to his mouth, and his hand wasn't trembling. I sang the third verse without looking away from him. The glass didn't come down. Chapter 2. The Man at the Back Table. I finished the song with my throat dry in a way that had nothing to do with the air. The last note hung in the room for a beat longer than it should have, vibrating between the stilled cups and the steam from the coffee machine. And I saw Bruno finally lower the cloth from his shoulder and breathe, like someone who had forgotten to while I was singing. The couple by the window clapped softly. The woman with the book smiled a little. The three men in suits at the back table did nothing, because no one at the back table had moved for an entire song. The man with his back to me, he wasn't with his back to me anymore. He had turned his chair sideways at some point I hadn't registered, and now he was facing me, elbow propped on the table, the glass finally resting on the wood. The candle on the back table lit his chin, the line of his jaw, the edge of the white collar under the dark suit. It didn't light his eyes. His eyes, I felt, didn't see. I came down the 3 steps off the stage with the calm I knew how to fake. I went straight to the counter. Bruno. Girl. His voice came out rough. He scrubbed the counter twice with the palm of his hand. No cloth. What song was that? One of my mother's. I've never heard you sing that one. I never have. He looked at me for 2 seconds with his brow furrowed, and I saw he was about to ask more. He didn't. He pushed a glass of water toward me and said, "Lo, drink." I drank. The water was cold enough to sting my throat, and I was grateful for the sting because it brought me back into my body. I looked over the rim of the glass toward the back table. The 3 men in suits had stood up. The man who had turned his chair was still sitting, but he made a gesture with 2 fingers to one of them, and the 3 of them moved off toward the door like well-trained dogs. "Bruno," I whispered. "Who is that customer? I told you not to ask, and I told you I'm asking." He sighed. He took the cloth off his shoulder, then put it back on his shoulder without using it. "Sienna." "Who is he, Bruno?" "He's a man who pays on time and doesn't make noise. For me, that's enough. For you, it should be enough too." I was going to argue. I didn't, because I heard the dry click of the hard heel of a good shoe against the cafe's wooden floor, and the click was coming from the back in my direction, and the click was alone, without company, without the 3 well-trained dogs. I tightened the notebook against my chest under my coat before turning. He stopped 2 steps from the counter. Up close, the light was better. He was in his early 30s, maybe a little older, dark hair combed back with a discipline that didn't tolerate a single strand out of place, and a thin scar on his left temple that looked like it had been made by something he had survived without paying much mind. The suit was the color of a moonless night. The tie was the same shade. No watch in sight. There was a thick signet ring on his right hand, with an old crest I couldn't read in the dim light. "Good evening," he said. His voice was low, and it had that specific calm of people who know no one is going to interrupt them. Behind me, Bruno stopped breathing again. "Good evening," I answered. "You sing well. Thank you." There was a pause. He studied my face without hurry, and I felt the locket weigh against the base of my throat, as if it had tripled in size in the last 5 minutes. The ceiling fan turned at a tired rhythm, and every revolution shifted his scent toward me. Wood, some old resin, and behind it something cold and clean, like an expensive hotel. "That last one," he went on, and his voice dropped half a tone, and he switched to Italian without warning, slowly, the way you set down a full glass on a table without spilling. "Chi te l'ha insegnata? Who taught it to you?" I knew Italian from my mother. The question landed straight, and it was precisely because it landed straight that I knew, before answering, that I had to lie. Elena had trained me for this since before I could spell her last name. If anyone recognizes the song, Sienna, anyone at all, you never tell the truth. Never. Promise me. I had promised at 10, and renewed the promise every year until she died. After that, without arranging it with anyone, I kept honoring it. I smiled the lightest smile I knew how to fake. "It's just a family song," I answered in English, not picking up the cue of his Italian. "My grandmother used to sing it. I think she made it up." He didn't look away from my face. I saw, with uncomfortable clarity, the second he knew I was lying. It wasn't anger. It wasn't surprise. It was a notation, like someone writing something down in a mental notebook to use later. "Your grandmother," he repeated. "Yes, made it up. That's what I think." He tilted his chin a millimeter, and the gesture made the low light from the counter lamp catch on the ring on his finger. The crest was Italian. I didn't know how to read crests, but I knew enough to know that one had history, and the history didn't fit in this cafe. "What's your name?" "I work here," I said, instead of answering. Bruno will take your order at any table. Good night. I turned to the side, picked my bag up off the stool, kissed the air near Bruno, and walked out the back door. I didn't run. I walked like someone finishing a shift, because running gives fear a name, and giving fear a name is inviting it to stay. The back door opened onto a wet alley. I went down the side street without looking back. The rain had thinned. The subway was 4 blocks away. I walked the 4 with my heart pounding in my throat, and the notebook pressed against my ribs inside my coat. On the train, I sat by the door. I took the notebook out of my bag with a slightly trembling hand. The red page was in its place. Elena's handwriting, firm, was in its place. Above the lyrics, in the top margin, there was a sentence I had never reread carefully. Never in public. Never for anyone who recognizes it. The pen had bled into the paper at one point, and the point formed a small mark shaped like a drop. I closed the notebook. The next morning, I opened the laundromat at 8:30. Mr. Greco hadn't arrived yet, which was strange, because he always got there before me and pretended he didn't. I turned on the machines, took the padlock off the door, hung up my coat, and started separating the morning drop-off bags. The smell of laundry powder and damp fabric rose into the room the way it did every morning, and I clung to it the way you cling to something familiar. The bell rang at 9:17. I know because I looked at the clock. A man walked in. Gray suit, not dark, with a cut that cost more than the whole place. He wasn't carrying laundry. He didn't have a ticket. He stopped in the middle of the shop, looked at the machines, looked at the counter, looked at me for exactly 2 seconds, and walked out without saying anything. I kept my hand inside an unfamiliar laundry bag for a full minute after the bell rang again on his way out. In the afternoon, he came back. The same suit, the same silence. This time he stayed a little longer near the window, and I, behind the counter, pretended to organize tickets that were already organized. Mr. Greco came out of the back room with a bag of coins, looked at the man, looked at me, and stopped. "Help?" Greco growled in the direction of the gray suit. The man smiled without any warmth, opened the door, and left. Greco waited for the bell to settle before he spoke. "That guy came in here this morning, too?" "He did." He scratched his tobacco-yellowed chin. "Girl, if I didn't know you, I'd ask what kind of trouble you got yourself into. Since I know you, I won't ask. But lock your door tonight." He handed me the bag of coins and went back to the rear without waiting for an answer. And the way he didn't wait for an answer was exactly the kind of thing that kept me awake at night. The next day, after work, I went back to my room with bread and 2 eggs. I went up the stairs the usual way, counting the steps out of habit. There were 14, always 14, and the 7th one creaked. I put the key in the lock. The door pushed inward before I turned the key. I stayed still with my hand on the knob for just 1 second. I pushed it open slowly. The hallway light came in ahead of me. The room was the way I had left it almost. The bed made, the leather suitcase under the bed, in place, the coat over the back of the chair, the notebook. I had left the notebook on the table, closed, with the locket on top of it. The notebook was on the table. It was closed. But the locket was beside it, not on top, and the notebook was turned 1/2 centimeter more to the left than I would ever have left it. Whoever had rifled through it hadn't taken anything. Whoever had rifled through it wanted me to know. I went back down the stairs, returned to the street, and walked straight to the Aurora without thinking about what I would say to Bruno before I got there. When I walked in, he was behind the counter with the towel over his shoulder. He raised his eyes to me and stopped scrubbing the glass mid-gesture. "Bruno, girl, has anyone asked about me here?" He scrubbed the glass once more, then once more, and dropped the glass in the sink without finishing. "Sienna, Bruno, has anyone asked about me?" He sighed. He took the towel off his shoulder, folded it in 4, set it on the counter. "Yesterday afternoon, a man in a suit, not the one from the other night, a different one. He left a card." Saying what? Nothing. He reached into his apron pocket and took out a white card, thick, with the expensive texture of paper that doesn't need a logo to impose itself. No name, just a number. I took the card. The paper was heavy between my fingers, a weight that didn't exist in ordinary stationery. The number was printed in matte black in the middle, with nothing around it. "Why didn't you call me?" I asked. "Because I was going to give it to you today, and you showed up today." He leaned over the counter, lowered his voice. "Sienna, that customer from the other night came back yesterday, sat at the same table, ordered black coffee, stayed an hour." I pressed the card between my thumb and index finger. "Bruno, who is he?" "I told you, girl. He's a man who pays on time. Bruno." He looked at me. His eyes were tired in a way I had never seen, and under the tiredness was something I recognized without wanting to. It was fear. He's the kind of man you don't call. Don't answer. Don't respond to. Throw that card away. Come back tomorrow. Sing. Go to sleep. Forget. I tucked the card into my coat pocket. I left the Aurora with the locket tapping my collarbone with every step. The rain had come back, fine, and the street was wet in a way that doubled the yellow light from the street lamps on the asphalt. 4 blocks to the subway. I knew the way with my eyes closed. I didn't make it to the corner. Pulled up to the curb, on the other side of the street, was a black car, big, the kind that looks carved out of a single stone. The windows were tinted, all of them, except the driver's, which was rolled down 3 fingers worth to let air in. The driver was looking straight ahead. The back door opened by itself. I didn't see who opened it, because the interior light didn't come on. Someone had disabled it on purpose. I just saw the gap, and I heard what came from it. A low voice, from inside the car, said my name in Italian. He said it slowly, with the same calm that had pushed the air out of the cafe one night earlier. It was the voice of the man at the back table. Chapter 3. 3 Conditions. The rain had stopped, but the sidewalk was still giving off the smell of wet asphalt when I walked out of the laundromat that night. Mr. Greco had grumbled a, "Be careful, girl," before lowering the grate, and I had laughed to myself, because he'd been saying that since I was 19, as if care were something you could buy at the register. The black car was there, across the street, exactly where I knew it would be, because a woody cologne isn't something you forget in 3 days. The light from the street lamp caught the hood in a matte sheen, and the steam rising from the manhole beside it gave the scene a movie texture I hadn't asked to walk into. He was leaning against the driver's door, the collar of his overcoat turned up, hands in his pockets. No visible security, no theater, just him, and the expensive silence of that kind of clothing. "Miss Bellucci." The low voice crossed the street as if the street weren't there. "We need to talk." I stopped on the curb. I hadn't given him my last name. He noticed immediately. "It wasn't hard to find out," he said, before I could ask. I could have run. I knew 3 alleys from that corner, and the subway was a block away. Instead, I crossed. Not because I trusted him. I crossed because I understood, in that second, that running was what he expected, and I was already tired of doing what men in suits expected. "Did you go into my room?" "No, but you know who did." He held my gaze for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "I know enough to make sure it doesn't happen again." He opened the back door of the car with a short gesture. "Get in. We're going somewhere where you'll stay standing until we sort this out." I don't get into the car of a man who hasn't given me his name. Matteo De Luca. He said it the way you hand someone a knife, handle first, without pride, without warning. And I, who had grown up listening to Elena whisper the names of families to avoid in the back corners of bars, recognized the surname before his mouth closed. De Luca. My hand closed on the locket under my collar without my asking it to. I felt the warmth of the metal against my sternum and thought, in one short pulse, that maybe Elena had taught me to distrust that exact woody scent, that maybe every time we'd moved in my childhood had been to avoid a man with exactly that surname said exactly that way. "No," I said. He raised an eyebrow a millimeter. It was almost humor. "No what? I'm not getting in. I'm not going to your house. I'm not accepting protection from a man who knows too much about a break-in he swears he didn't do." I gripped the strap of my bag until I felt the leather burn my palm. "Unless we agree on 3 things first." He didn't move. The driver, whom I hadn't even noticed before, standing 3 steps behind him, rolled his eyes so discreetly I only caught it because the street lamp lit the white in the corner. I swallowed the urge to laugh. "Name the 3, Matteo answered. "A door with a lock on the inside. I lock it whenever I want, and no one comes in unless I open it. There's a lock on the inside tonight. Freedom to come and go. I'm not a guest under custody. I leave when I need to, come back when I want. You leave and come back whenever you want." The last one cost me more breath. I felt my throat dry up and forced my voice to come out without trembling. And no lies. I looked at him straight. "If I ask, you answer. If you can't answer, you say you can't, but you don't give me a wrong answer." He held my eyes for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded once. Granted, it was the first time I was afraid of him. Not because he refused, because he accepted all 3 the way a man signs a contract he's already read before. I got into the car. The drive to the mansion lasted less time than I wanted. Manhattan went by the window in neon blurs, and the driver, I later learned his name was Dante, because Matteo dropped his name as a short order on the phone, drove without making a single sharp turn. I felt the weight of the man next to me without needing to look. He didn't try to talk. He didn't try to explain. He smelled like expensive whiskey, and something darker, maybe bergamot, maybe danger, and I didn't have the capacity at that moment to separate one from the other. The leather of the seat was cold against my thighs through my jeans, and every time the car passed a brighter intersection, I caught his reflection in the dark window, still, looking straight ahead, as if silence were his most honest way of looking at me. When the gate opened, I swallowed hard. The house wasn't ostentatious the way I had imagined. It was worse. It was discreet in a way that cost much more. The housekeeper, a middle-aged woman who greeted me with a nod and not with her voice, led me to the guest room on the second floor. On the canopy bed, on a sand-toned coverlet, an expensive dress was laid out as if it were part of the decor. Fine fabric, modest neckline, no store tag. I looked at it for a second and shut the door behind her. I didn't touch the dress. I slept in jeans, with the door locked and the locket in my hand. The next morning, I came down in the same wrinkled clothes from the night before, hair pulled back any old way, no makeup. If he was expecting a refreshed Cinderella on the staircase, he was going to have breakfast with the sienna he had brought home. Matteo was at the dining room table, in a dark suit without a tie, the newspaper folded beside his plate. He was drinking black coffee, no sugar, no milk, nothing. The morning light came in through a tall window behind him and traced an outline on the shoulders of his suit that looked cut by a knife. I sat in the farthest chair he allowed me with his look. "Good morning? Good morning?" The housekeeper poured my coffee before I asked and inquired in that quiet voice whether I'd like anything else. Without thinking much, I said I'd love some chamomile tea. I saw Matteo raise his eyes from the newspaper for a second and go back to it. I drank the coffee while I watched the way he held the cup. 2 fingers on the handle, thumb out, short movement, small sips. "You drink coffee without sugar like a man trying not to taste anything." The sentence came out before I weighed it. It was the irony I used with Mr. Greco when he asked for rent. It was the way Elena talked to men who ordered too much. I wasn't expecting an answer. He didn't answer. He folded the newspaper slowly, carefully, the way you close a book in the middle. He looked at the housekeeper, just looked, and she left without him saying a word. She came back 3 minutes later with a steaming cup in front of me. Chamomile tea. I hadn't mentioned chamomile to her. I had mentioned it to Matteo, in the car, when he asked if I wanted to stop somewhere. I'd said I just wanted chamomile tea and to sleep. He had answered, "We have it at the house." And I had laughed to myself, thinking it was just a turn of phrase. I looked at the cup. I looked at him. Steam rose between us in a thin line, and for a second, the sweet scent of chamomile felt out of place in that room of dark wood, heavy silverware, and old silence. He turned the page of the newspaper. "Thank you," I said carefully. "Nothing to thank me for." I drank the tea in silence. Inside, I was processing. That wasn't kindness. That was strategy. A man who memorizes details about you on the first day is a man measuring the best way to lower your guard. I knew. Elena had taught me. I wasn't going to forget just because the chamomile was at the right temperature. That night there was a dinner. Bigger table. 2 guests. The candles had been lit in 3 candlesticks along the center of the table, and the light made everything look older than it was. The veteran capo arrived first. A man in his 50s. Broad shoulders. A thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He greeted Matteo with mechanical respect and greeted me with a look that lingered half a second longer than courtesy allows. The second guest was introduced as Vittorio Moretti, uncle of the family, and he had the kind of sweetness I had already learned to fear. White hair, trimmed close, slow smile, thin hands. When he greeted me, he held my hand 2 seconds longer than necessary. His skin was dry, cold at the fingertips, and I had to force myself not to pull my hand back at once. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Matteo set his glass on the table a second earlier than was natural. "So this is the young lady who sings," Vittorio said softly. "Bruno told me about the voice. He didn't exaggerate. Do you go to the Aurora?" "Now and then. I'm too old for everything except good music." He smiled in a way that felt paternal. "And your mother? Did she sing too?" The question came in the middle of dinner, between the second course and the third, and I swallowed slowly before answering. "She did." "Did she leave anything written down?" The smile stayed in place. "A notebook? Sheet music? Singers like to leave what they wrote." I felt Matteo's hand stop with the fork halfway to his plate. It was almost imperceptible. Almost. "A few lyrics," I answered, with the most neutral smile I could manage. "Nothing worth anything. Everything a mother leaves is worth something. Vittorio went back to his plate. I went back to mine. Matteo resumed eating with the exact same calm as before, but I saw, out of the corner of my eye, that he had logged the question as if he had jotted it down somewhere behind his eyes. It was the veteran capo who ruined the rest of the night. He waited for coffee to be served before turning his chair half a degree toward Matteo and saying, in the clear voice of a man speaking at a meeting, "Matteo, with all due respect, bringing a stranger into the house, without a family name we know, at a time like this, is a decision that calls for an explanation." Vittorio cut a piece of bread, pretending not to listen. I sat still, my fingers firm around the cup so as not to betray that they had stiffened. It took Matteo 3 seconds to answer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't set down his silverware hard. He looked at the capo, the way you look at someone before removing him from the table forever. "Miss Bellucci is my guest." His voice came out low, flat, no crack. "And you are confusing your chair with mine." The capo didn't answer. He swallowed, nodded, went back to his coffee. He didn't lift his eyes from his plate for the rest of dinner. Vittorio smiled at me, as if nothing had happened, and asked for a little more wine. I went up to my room before dessert. I locked the door from the inside. I pressed my forehead to the cold wood and breathed, until my heart went back to a normal person's rhythm. For the first time since I had entered that house, I thought maybe Matteo De Luca wasn't exactly the man I had sketched in my head. I thought that, and pushed the thought away, the same way you brush an insect off your skin before knowing whether it bites. The next morning, when I came back from the bathroom with the towel on my hair, I stopped at the door of my room. The lock was different, a reinforced cylinder model, 2 extra pins, exactly the same model I had mentioned out loud in the car when he asked what kind of lock would let me sleep. It hadn't been there the night before. It had been swapped while I slept, without noise, without warning, without a bill. I closed the door, locked it, unlocked it, locked it again. The click of the cylinder was short, dry, satisfied. It worked perfectly. I sat on the edge of the bed with the new key in my palm. The metal still had that thin workshop smell of oil and freshly cut brass. For a second, I almost felt something like relief. Right after I remembered, he meets the 3 conditions to the letter because he needs what I know, not because he cares. The lock is an investment, not a kindness. The tea was a calculation, not a care. I repeated that to myself like a prayer, not sure I believed it. I repeated it so many times I almost convinced myself, even though part of me suspected otherwise. That night, I lay in bed with the key under my pillow and Elena's notebook in my lap. I leafed through to the page marked in red and stopped. I didn't sing. I just read. I ran my thumb along the margin of the old paper as if Elena could feel the touch from the other side. Thirst made me get up. I unlocked the door, walked barefoot down the hallway to go down to the kitchen, and it was at the top of the stairs that I noticed. The door of the music room, downstairs, was ajar, and a yellow light was escaping from it. The stairwell carried the sound up unfiltered, and that's why I heard it. Notes played slowly, one, by fingers that missed the interval and went back. Missed again, went back. It was the lullaby. It was Elena's song, and the one trying to reproduce it, with the wrong fingers, on the piano in the De Luca house at 3 a.m, was the man who had sworn to me he wouldn't lie. Chapter 4. The Piano at Midnight. I went down the stairs barefoot, the new key still in my hand. The house, at that hour, had a different silence from the silence of my rented room. It was an expensive silence, of thick carpet and good wood, that muffled footsteps, but not breathing. The light came in faintly through the gap in the music room door at the end of the hall, and the notes kept coming. 2 right, 1 wrong, pause, 2 right, 1 wrong, pause. I knew where he went wrong. I had known for so many years that my body finished the measure without asking permission from my brain. The song lived in a place in me that didn't depend on active memory. It lived in my bones, in the way I breathed before the highest note, in the small hesitation Elena made in the 3rd measure that I had, without meaning to, learned to imitate when I began to sing to myself in the dark of my own room. I stopped at the half-open door before pushing it. Matteo was sitting at the black grand piano, on the edge of the bench, his suit without the jacket, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The lamp beside the music stand cast half his face in light, and the other half in shadow. There was no sheet music open. There were just his hands on the keys, and his hands didn't look like the hands of a don there. They looked like the hands of a 7-year-old boy trying to remember something he wasn't supposed to have forgotten. There was a glass of whiskey on top of the closed lid of the piano, untouched, the ice already melted into a puddle around the base. The smell of the spirit mixed with the waxed wood of the instrument, and something very subtle that came from him. The dark cologne he wore, more discreet now, worn out by the whole day. He missed again. He hit the same wrong note 3 times in a row, harder each time, as if the piano were the one at fault. I pushed the door open. He didn't startle. He lifted his eyes slowly, saw it was me, and for a second, I saw his face without a mask. It was quick. It went back into place before I could decide what I had seen. "You don't sleep," I said. "Neither do you." I crossed the rug and sat on the other end of the bench. I didn't touch him. We were 3 hand widths apart, with the piano between us like a border neither of us knew exactly how to cross. I felt the heat of his arm at that distance. It was a dry heat, of a man who sleeps little and drinks too much coffee, and it took up the skin of my whole forearm as if he had touched me. "That's not how it goes," I said. "I know. It's a half step higher. Here." I brought my hand to the keyboard and played the 3 notes he kept missing. F, G, a flat. The rest comes before the A, not after. He watched my fingers. I saw the corner of his mouth twitch a fraction, registering something that wasn't a smile. He played it again. He got it right. "Again?" I asked. He played again. He got it right. We played the entire verse of the lullaby together. His hand took the lower notes. Mine completed the higher ones. We didn't look at each other. We looked at the keyboard, and the keyboard was the only thing in that room that could hold the weight of what was happening in it. His fingers were long, with a thin scar at the knuckle of his left index finger that I hadn't seen before, and they moved with a care that didn't match anything I knew about who he was outside that room. When the last note died in the air, he didn't take his hands off the keys. "She ran away when I was 7, he said quietly. It was the last thing she sang before she went. I stood at the bedroom door. I didn't say anything. I had learned from Elena that there's a difference between silence and absence, and that men who carry vanished mothers usually need the first, not the second. "I looked for the whole melody my entire life," he went on records, with teachers, with women. I never found it. I'd sing only pieces, miss the rest, forget, come back. I thought I'd invented what was missing. "You didn't invent it." "No." He looked at me. "Who taught you?" The question came without the weight of an interrogation this time. It came as a boy's question. "My mother," I answered. "Elena." He didn't say anything, but I saw in the line of his jaw something harden and then settle back into place. It was so fast I thought I had imagined it. The muscle in his jaw clenched once, then released, and his right hand came down off the key into his lap, in a gesture meant to look like rest, but wasn't. "Have you ever heard the name Bellucci before?" "No." His thumb stayed half a second too long over the middle key before letting go. He covered it with a clean change of subject. "You play better than I do. It's not hard." I got up from the bench. I needed to get out of there before he saw what that night had done to me. "Good night." I went up the stairs with controlled hurry. In the hallway, I passed the door of the study, which was ajar. I glanced in without meaning to. The desk lamp was on, and the bottom drawer of the cabinet on the right had a brown folder half pulled out of the color. Matteo appeared behind me, coming from the music room. I heard his step on the carpet, and he reached out for the doorknob of the study, closed the drawer with his knee in a gesture meant to look casual, and locked the study door behind him. The sound of the bolt was firmer than it needed to be. A Don's natural reserve, I thought. Every house that size has a locked drawer. I kept walking. I locked my bedroom. I pressed my forehead against the pillow and didn't sleep. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't fear that kept me awake. It was the other thing. The next morning, I found Matteo on the veranda. The Manhattan sky was the color of washed steel, fresh but without rain, and he was drinking his usual black coffee at an iron table overlooking the garden. The wind stirred the leaves of the magnolia planted near the railing, and the distant sound of a church bell came muffled through the blocks. On the table, a pitcher of juice, a basket of bread I knew he wouldn't touch, and the newspaper folded in half with the crease exactly in its usual place. I took the locket off my neck. I sat in front of him and put the open locket on the table, between his cup and mine. "Look." He looked. The picture was small. 2 young women, embracing shoulder to shoulder in some piazza in Sicily. On the left, Elena. I recognized the eyebrow I inherited. On the right, a woman with light hair, a short smile, eyes I had never seen, but that I recognized at once. Matteo took a deep breath. "Just one. It's her." "I know. Where did your mother get this?" "I don't know." I turned the locket in my palm. But there's more. I showed him the back. Lucia's handwriting, small, firm, engraved in a material that had withstood decades. Elena, if I don't survive, protect my son from his family. He read it twice. He didn't speak. He kept looking at the sentence as if, by reading it again, the sentence might move. The cup he was holding between his index finger and thumb trembled in an almost invisible way, and he set it down on the saucer with exaggerated care, like someone who doesn't trust his own wrist. I waited. I didn't console him. I didn't reach out. I had learned from Elena that big men who receive big news need time, not a gesture. When he finally lifted his eyes, I saw for the first time in my life what a dawn without any reserve looks like. It was a second. Then he gathered it all back behind his eyes. I want to know, I said, before he spoke. Everything you know about Lucia's disappearance. Everything. No half-truths. I don't need protection. I need information. I know little. Then tell me the little you know. He spoke. He spoke about the night Lucia left, saying she was going to buy bread and didn't come back. He spoke about the father who forbade her name in the house for 10 years. He spoke about the unfinished letter found years later in a shoebox in the attic. He spoke quietly, without ornament, and I believed every word because none of them were comfortable. While he spoke, I noticed he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the exact spot in the garden where the morning sun was beginning to balance over the trellis, and it was the look of someone who needed an anchor to be able to open his mouth. When he finished, I said, "We investigate together. Sienna. Together. It's not a request. It's the only way I'll stay in this house." He nodded. I closed the locket, hung it around my neck again. I drank the coffee that had gone cold and didn't comment on it. 2 weeks later. The 2 weeks had passed with the strangeness of two people learning to share a silence without sharing a bed. Matteo let me go to the Aurora at night because it was a condition. Bruno hugged me when he saw me arrive and poured me house wine without asking. I sang 3 songs, none of them Elena's, and pretended everything was the same. The cafe smelled of rosemary from the Sunday sauce and the burnt sugar of the day's dessert, and for a few minutes, in the middle of the second chorus, it was almost possible to believe that my life still fit on that small stage. On the way out, on the corner where the street lamp always flickered, a car cut me off. It was fast. The shooter's sedan came from the right, braked diagonally, stopped half a hand's width from my bumper. I was in the driver's seat of the small car Matteo had left me with the week before, after I'd complained that taking the subway at 1 a.m. was getting ridiculous, and my body understood before my brain did. I tossed the notebook under the seat, killed the engine, opened the passenger door on the other side, and ran out down the alley. I knew that alley. I had lived 3 blocks from there at 17, in a room worse than my current one, and I had learned to cut behind the grocery store's loading area to get to the subway faster. The shooter got out of the sedan. I saw it in the reflection of a closed shop window, and shouted something in Italian with a southern accent. I didn't wait to translate. I ran. The wet asphalt from the afternoon rain gave back the sound of my boots in a short echo, and I remembered, without meaning to, in which stretch of wall there was a flaw in the brickwork you could squeeze through. When I turned the second corner, I stopped behind a dumpster and pulled the phone out of my pocket. "Black 4-door car, sedan. No visible plate," I said before he even said hello. Shooter got out of the back seat, white, tall, thick ring on the pinky of his right hand. Southern accent, Calabrian maybe. He smelled like pipe tobacco, not cigarette. "Where are you?" "Alley behind the market, behind the green dumpster. Don't move. 2 minutes." It was 1:40. Dante arrived, driving the black car the wrong way down the alley, stopped beside me, and Matteo got out before the car was still. He didn't hug me. He looked at me for 2 seconds, checked that I was in one piece, and opened the back door. It was in those 2 seconds that I saw something in him he wouldn't let me see later. A raw relief, without a name, that lasted exactly the length of one breath. "Get in." I got in. He got in after me. The car took off. "Ring on the pinky right hand," he repeated. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "Calabria?" "Could be. I couldn't swear to the city. I just know it wasn't the Italian my mother spoke." He looked at Dante in the rearview mirror. Dante nodded. "It's the capo from the port," Matteo said, more to himself than to me. He was the one at my table that night. "I'm going to be there." "Where?" "When you decide what to do with him. I'm going to be there." "Sienna, this isn't—" "I'm going to be there." I held his eyes. "You promised no lies." "I'm extending the promise." He held my gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded once, like the night on the sidewalk, like everything he signs when he signs. 24 hours later, I was in a warehouse that smelled of oil and scrap iron. There was a chair in the center of the concrete, and the capo from the port was in it, his hands tied behind the backrest and a fine cut above his eyebrow where blood was running down in a single straight line. Matteo came in through the side door without looking at me. I stood near the door with my arms crossed. There was no scream. That was the part that stayed with me. The capo tried to negotiate in fast Italian, with a southern accent, and Matteo answered in short sentences. I didn't translate because my ear refused. Then Matteo drew the gun from the holster inside his jacket, with the exact gesture of someone closing a book in the middle. A single shot. The capo's body fell forward against the rope that held him, and his head hung in a way I had never seen a head hang. I stood near the door with my arms crossed and my feet firm on the concrete. The cold of the warehouse came up through the thin soles of my boots and climbed to my knees, and I thought, with a clarity that frightened me, that I was learning to confuse cold with calm. We went back to the mansion at dawn. Dante drove in silence. Matteo looked out the window. I looked at my hands in my lap. They were still. They weren't trembling. The hands. I looked at my hands in my lap and waited. I waited for the tremor at the traffic light. I waited for the tremor on the bridge. I waited for the tears in the tunnel. I waited for the nausea when the iron smell of the warehouse seemed to come back through the air of the car, even though it hadn't. Nothing. My hands were still in my lap like someone else's hands. It wasn't Matteo I was afraid of. It was the Sienna who had grown up moving from address to address without knowing why, who had inherited a notebook and a locket, who had walked into a warehouse behind a don of the Cosa Nostra, and walked out of it without leaving behind any of the parts of herself that should have stayed behind. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass of the car and thought, before I forbade myself to think it, that maybe Elena had taught me more things than I knew I had learned. Chapter 5. Almost, but not yet. The mansion's kitchen had a Sunday light that didn't match what I carried inside my chest. It was early afternoon. The sun cut the light marble counter into 2 unequal parts, and I was standing outside that line, looking at Matteo with my arms crossed as if my posture could hold up what my voice was about to say. Through the open window came the warm scent of rosemary from the garden, and the distant sound of a fountain I had never located. Inside, the off-oven still gave off an echo of bread, the dark wood cabinets absorbed the light, and the only bright thing in the room, besides the marble, was his eyes. He watched me in silence, with that lethal patience of a man who knows how to wait for a sentence to cross another person's throat. I need to know something, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. What am I inside this house? Target? Bait? Or a person? He set the cup on the marble, slowly. The minimal sound seemed larger than it was, as if the whole kitchen had sharpened its hearing. Don't answer fast, I asked, because fast has answered me once this week, and it gave me the urge not to believe anymore. Matteo took a step, rounded the corner of the counter, and stopped on my side of the line of sun. His breath smelled of unsweetened coffee, and my body, without asking permission, decided to recognize that as a familiar place. I hated my body for 2 whole seconds. He pressed his fingers against the edge of the marble, beside my elbow, without touching me. His fingers had that trained quietness of a man who had learned not to make noise, even when his body wanted to. I looked at his wrist, at the vein that ran up to his watch, and forced myself to look at anything else. Person, he said. Always a person. Say it looking at me. He looked, and it was worse, because his eyes had a crack in them, and I no longer knew whose it was, the mother who vanished, or the woman who sang the mother's song in some café on a rainy night that felt like it had happened to a different Sienna. He stepped a centimeter closer. I felt his breath on my face before the rest. The counter behind me, cold, pressed into my hand, and the temperature traveled up my arm like a warning. His mouth was one movement from mine, and it was in that millimeter that I realized I was the one leaning in. Matteo pulled back first. It wasn't a big step. It was a quarter of a step, enough to return the air between us to its original size. He lowered his eyes and said quietly, "You deserve to decide far from fear. I'm not going to kiss you while fear is in the room." I didn't know whether that was care or calculation, and it was that doubt that left me furious. Furious with him for pulling back. Furious with myself for wanting a man I still didn't trust. Furious with the kitchen sun for lighting all of it at once. "Fine," I said, with my whole voice. "Then get out of my way because I need to breathe without your face 2 fingers from mine." He moved. No irony, no comment. He moved like a man obeying one of the 3 conditions I had set on the laundromat sidewalk, and it was exactly that clean compliance that disarmed me more than any argument would have. "Shh," In the days that followed, he began opening drawers I didn't even know existed. One afternoon, he took me to the mansion's library, a room that smelled of old leather and stored paper, with heavy curtains that filtered the light into strands, and pulled down from a high shelf a shoebox with no label. The dust on top of the box was smooth, untouched, and he blew on it gently before opening it, like someone asking permission of his own past. "She stopped in the middle of the sentence," he said, running his finger along the curve of the last word. "I don't know if she was interrupted or if she gave up," I read over his shoulder. Lucia's handwriting had the same right-leaning slant as the note on the back of my locket. It was like recognizing a relative in an old photo, with a thin clench in the stomach that took a while to pass. On another afternoon, it was photos. A 7-year-old boy with the exact eyes of the man beside me, sitting on a stone step, holding the wrist of a woman who smiled without showing her teeth. Behind the boy, a whitewashed wall, a dry vine, a low afternoon light that must have been autumn somewhere that wasn't Manhattan. "I always thought," Matteo said, not looking at me, "that she had abandoned me." It took me 27 years to say that sentence out loud. I didn't say anything. I had learned from Bruno that some sentences need silence on the other side, or they fall apart in the air. Instead of answering, I pressed 2 fingers against the corner of the photo, near the boy's bare ankle, and left them there for as long as his time lasted. At night, he didn't sleep. I knew because the light in the hallway stayed on too late, and his footsteps in the music room had the rhythm of a man walking in circles over the same rug. On one of those nights, I dragged the reading chair from my bedroom and sat in his doorway, without going in, with my robe closed up to my neck, and my bare feet tucked up on the cushion. "May I?" I asked. He was lying on his back, dressed, shoes on the floor, eyes open at the ceiling. He nodded once. I sang, not his song, not Lucia's song. I sang some silly thing Elena had taught me to fall asleep when I had a fever, a 6-note melody that didn't say anything and could therefore say everything. I sang quietly, without touching him, without going any further in than the chair had already gone. On the 4th verse, his eyes closed. On the 7th, his breathing dropped in pitch. I sang to the end, and then sang it again from the beginning, lower, and when I noticed he was asleep, I stayed a little longer just to make sure he wouldn't wake up alone in the middle. His chest rose and fell to a slow beat, and I counted 3 full breaths before letting myself breathe deeply too. When I went back to my room, I lay down on the bed in the clothes I had on, and looked at the ceiling for the first time in years, without pretending to be tired. The sheet smelled like the housekeeper's lavender soap, and the scent bothered me for being too good for a night like that. I was lost in a place I had sworn I'd never reach. It wasn't pretty, it was honest, and that was worse. Shh. Matteo agreed to let him in when I asked if he could. He didn't argue. Bruno showed up at the mansion on a Saturday, in a suit he kept for weddings and a packet of cookies that didn't need wrapping. His shoes creaked on the polished floor, and he came in through the front door as if walking into his own house, without noticing the expensive paintings or the arrangements of fresh flowers that cost more than the rent on my old room. "You sleep late, son," he said to Matteo, without greeting him, staring at him from the other side of the breakfast table. "You're going to get the under-eye circles of a man who's hiding money." I choked on my chamomile tea. Matteo's driver bodyguard, standing by the door as always, rolled his eyes with a discretion, only learned through years of training not to laugh. Matteo raised an eyebrow. Bruno bit into a cookie, chewed slowly, made a point of chewing all the way through before going on. "I'm looking at my girl," Bruno continued, pointing at me with the cookie, "and she's got color back, so you either keep doing what you're doing, or I pull you out of here by the ear. A house that serves tea doesn't kill anyone, my mother used to say. That's a fair rule," Matteo answered, in a voice closer than any I had heard from him. I laughed. It was a small laugh, but it came out, and it was my first laugh at that table in 3 weeks. The driver, still at the door, dropped his eyes to the floor on purpose. On a quick trip to the Aurora with Bruno, I let my hand slide along the side of the old piano, while he counted the coins in the register behind the counter. The wood of the instrument was warm, worn at the corner by decades of hands. I played a note near the lower corner. The sound came out muffled, as if it were traveling through cloth, and died before reaching the wall. "This piano's soul is locked up," I said. "Why don't you replace it?" Bruno stopped counting. He looked at the piano with the tenderness you reserve for an old animal. "It was the favorite of an old customer," he said, towel on his shoulder. "I won't sell it, won't replace it, won't repair it." "Old when?" "Before you." He turned his back to arrange glasses. "Good woman." Vanished. I didn't ask more. but my hand lingered a second longer on the corner before lowering, and the muffled sound stayed in my ear the rest of the way back. On Sunday night, Mateo knocked on my door. I opened it slowly. He was in a white shirt, no jacket, hair damp from a shower. His cologne had dropped in intensity, leaving only a shadow of cedar. He wasn't carrying anything in his hands. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'm closing the Aurora just for you, not as the owner of the cafe, as a man." I looked at his face. The crack in his eyes had become something else. A door, maybe, that he had decided to leave open on purpose. I didn't answer with my mouth. I rested my hand on the doorframe, slowly, and nodded once. He nodded back, turned, and walked down the hall without looking back. And when I closed the door, I pressed my forehead against the wood and realized that my heart was beating to the rhythm of that little 6-note song I had sung to put him to sleep. Chapter 6. The Light He Didn't Turn Off Alone. The Aurora seen from outside on a Monday night was a different cafe. The chairs upstairs were turned upside down on the tables, their legs sticking up like still legs in the air, the closed sign hanging on the inside of the glass, and the streetlight came in as if it didn't have permission to. There was a thin puddle on the sidewalk reflecting the unlit neon of the sign, and the damp smell of cold asphalt rose to my face, as if to remind me where I'd come from before walking in. The driver stopped the car half a block away, opened the door for me, and stayed at his post without following me. He nodded slowly, the way he did when he thought the night was none of his business. Mateo was already inside. I saw him through the glass before walking in, standing beside the old piano, no jacket, nothing in his hands, with a single light on above the small stage. The white shirt had its sleeves rolled up to the elbow, and the silver watch caught the strand of light and gave it back in a thin gleam on the piano top. I walked in through the front door, not the back. I decided that on the way, between one block and the next, listening to my heel hit the damp concrete the way someone counts steps before a choice. The back door was the Don's. The front door was mine. I pushed the glass, and Bruno's little bell rang low, and Mateo turned his head slowly, without hurry, like a man waiting for a promise, and not a surprise. "You came," he said quietly, as if there were still a chance I wouldn't. "I came." He pointed at the stage with his chin. I went up the wooden step that had been creaking in the same spot for years. The microphone was off, with the cable wrapped around the stand in a careful way that wasn't Bruno's. He wanted it then, without amplification. I understood without needing to ask. "Sing," he said. "My mother's. One more time. For me." I looked at him, and for the first time in all the times I had sung that song, I didn't sing it for Elena. I sang it for the man standing beside the piano, hand resting on the closed lid, not moving. I sang slowly, without ornament, without hiding. My voice rose through the empty room and seemed to find every wall as if recognizing a room from childhood. He didn't freeze. He crossed the room on the third verse. He climbed the 2 steps onto the stage on the 5th. He stopped in front of me on the 7th, close enough that I could smell the cedar and new leather on the collar of his shirt. And when I finished the last note, his hand took mine. His palm was warm, warmer than I expected on a night that cold, and the calluses on his index finger pressed against my wrist like a question. "I know a lot of things now that I didn't know the night you sang," he said, in a voice lower than usual. "I know that your mother kept a promise for mine. I know that the 2 of them tried to protect children from the same family. I know there are people in this city who would rather that song die with you the way it died with them." He pressed my fingers a millimeter harder. A millimeter was his unit for things he didn't say out loud. "You won't be silenced," he went on. "You won't be sold. You won't be erased. I swear it on the name I inherited, and the name I haven't yet chosen." I didn't cry. I wanted to, but my body understood before me that this wasn't the moment to spend a tear. This was the moment to listen to every word of his with an open memory, because men of that kind promised little, and when they promised, it was to be written down. "What exactly are you promising me?" I asked quietly, "because promises from men like you usually come with fine print." He smiled out of the corner of his mouth. It was a short smile, almost imperceptible, and it vanished before I could return it. "What am I promising?" he repeated, slowly, as if testing his own sentence. "That I'm going to burn whatever needs to be burned inside my own house before I let anyone touch you. That I'm going to tell you what I find, even what hurts. That I'm not going to keep your life in a drawer." The last sentence landed in my chest as if it already knew me. I thought, for a quick second, that it was too specific a sentence for a man who only spoke in averages. Drawer was a word from someone who had one. Drawer was a word from someone who had already locked something inside one. I let the thought pass like a draft of air. I noted it without understanding, the same way you note an address before knowing why it matters. But his hand was on mine, and the single light was above the two of us. And the song was still floating in the room like dust in the light, caught in the upside-down cups on the counter and the inverted glasses on the shelf behind the bar. I pressed my forehead against his. His skin was warm, with a faint scent of dried mint, and his pulse beat under my thumb 3 times before I spoke. "I'm choosing to stay," I whispered. He closed his eyes for 2 full seconds, like a man receiving a sentence he had expected to go the other way. His lashes trembled once. It was the most fragile thing I had ever seen on that face. He kissed me once, just once. Standing beside the piano, with his hand on my face and my hand on his chest, feeling the heart of a man who wasn't pretending. The kiss was slower than I expected. It wasn't a conquest. It was a confirmation. He didn't take his hand off my face right away. He kept his forehead against mine longer than he should have, breathing against my mouth, and I felt his thumb come down slowly along the line of my jaw to the nape of my neck, hold there firmly, like a man deciding not to let go before the time. I closed my eyes. He smelled of cedar and dried mint, and his heart kept beating under my hand as if the confirmation were still happening. Then he walked to the stage, switched off the light with his finger, came back, took my hand without saying anything, and walked me to the door. He turned the key from the inside. The click of the lock in the silence of the cafe sounded like an answer to a question I hadn't even finished asking. Shh. Morning reached the master bedroom of the mansion before I did. It was the first time I had woken up in that bed, and the light already knew the way. It came through the gap in the curtain, crossed the Persian rug in burgundy tones, climbed the natural linen sheet, and settled slowly against my back, as if asking permission to stay. I was wearing his white shirt, long sleeves, buttons open at the collar, the smell of a man's soap, and of a whole night. I turned my head without fully opening my eyes. Matteo was awake, on his side, propped on his elbow, watching me breathe like a man who still couldn't believe it. His hair was rumpled in a way I had never seen, and the shadow of his unshaved beard darkened his jaw. "How long have you been there?" I asked, my voice still asleep. "A little while," he said. "Enough. Enough for what?" He took a while to answer. His finger traced a slow line on my shoulder, over the fabric of the shirt, without hurrying to get anywhere. Then he ran his thumb along the sleeve I was wearing, folded it back with care, 1 turn only, the way I had never asked. To understand what I didn't understand. I didn't ask him to explain. Some of his sentences came with their own handle, and I was learning to use it. We got up without hurry. He put on dark trousers and stayed bare-chested, and the scar on his temple that I had already memorized was now doubled in the morning light by a thin line over the collarbone I hadn't yet seen. I went out onto the veranda in his shirt, barefoot, because the dark wood floor was warm and the morning was still ours, and no one had a scheduled arrival. The veranda overlooked a garden I hadn't really seen before. There was an old lemon tree in the corner, with small, still green fruit, and a gray stone bench with moss along the edges. The birds were making the discreet kind of noise that goes with a breakfast without urgent topics. The housekeeper appeared with the tray before I asked. Chamomile tea for me, black coffee with no sugar for him, warm bread, cheese, fig jam from Sicily in a little glass jar with a cork stopper. She set everything on the white painted iron table and stepped away without a sound, as if she had known for weeks that this breakfast would happen. We ate in comfortable silence. The sun rose slowly over the rooftops. The air had the thin chill of early autumn, and the locket swung between the buttons of the shirt every time I leaned toward the cup. The chamomile had a discreet honey taste, the kind you only catch at the end, after the liquid is already down. At some point, I picked up the locket and opened it. The photo of Elena and Lucia was there, intact, as always. 2 young women, embracing, with the light of a sun that no longer existed on their faces. 2 women who probably never knew that one day a daughter and a son would have breakfast at the same table, with a tray between them and a locket open on a palm sticky with jam. I tucked the locket into the pocket of his shirt. I pressed the fabric with my hand, slowly, feeling the relief of the clasp through the cotton. And it was at that second, exactly that one, that I had a quick thought. It was about his eyes the night before, when I said Elena's name in some sentence between the verses of what he promised me. Something in his eyes had slipped out for half a second and closed back too fast. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't calculation. It was something else. Something that didn't yet have a name inside him. Something he maybe didn't even know I had seen. I thought about asking. I looked at Matteo. His cup was halfway to his mouth. He was looking at the garden, and the morning light hit his face in a way that took off decades, without the weight of the jacket, without the weight of the house, without the weight of the name. He looked for an instant like the 7-year-old boy who had lost a mother and had never found another. For the first time in 24 years, I wasn't alone on a veranda. I pushed the thought aside. For the first time in my life, I was at peace. We were together. We were fine. The tea was still warm. The bread was still warm, and his hand appeared over mine on the iron table without warning, closing my fingers with the delicacy of a man who had learned late to touch fragile things. I chose to believe it. He owes me a truth, I thought, my hand still closed over the locket inside the pocket of his shirt, but not today. Lena here. That wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. 3 months after the night I chose to stay, I woke up wearing his white shirt, my mother's locket still warm against my chest, and his body pressed to mine as if it would never let go. Mateo was sleeping peacefully, slow breathing, heavy arm over my waist, the same man who, every morning, served me chamomile tea and kissed the nape of my neck as if I were the only good thing he had ever done in his life. I believed it. I believed it so much that I lowered every guard I had, until the night I opened the drawer he always kept locked. Inside, the order of execution for my mother, and, stapled on top, a recent piece of paper, in his handwriting, "Keep Sienna close. Use emotional attachment as damage containment. Every kiss, every, I'll protect you." Every night he took me slowly, looking into my eyes. All of it had been calculated. I wasn't his love. I was a piece in a game, and the worst was reading what was written on the last line. I got out of bed with my legs trembling, my heart bleeding in my chest, and I understood the cruelest truth of that mansion. Running from Matteo De Luca would be dangerous. But staying could destroy me forever, because the worst prison isn't the cell he locks you in. It's the warm embrace you accept when you fall in love with the man sharpening the knife at your back. Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from Mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book 2, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com